Ricardo Livia Munoz Ramirez, aka Richard Ramirez, was an American serial killer, sex offender, and burglar. His killing spree occurred in LA and San Francisco Bay Area from 1984 to 1985. Ramirez murdered at least 15 people. His crime took place at night, hence the name the Night Stalker. He was convicted and sentenced to death in 1989 and died while waiting for execution on 2013. Ramirez was born in El Paso, Texas on February 29, 1960 to Mexican immigrants to Mercedes Munoz and Julian Ramirez. Richard Ramirez was the younger of the five children. His father, a violent alcoholic who worked at a railway. Ramirez grew up in an abusive household. Ramirez was brought up in the Catholic faith. He began smoking weed and drinking at age 10. Psychiatrist Michael Stone described Ramirez as a made psychopath as opposed to being born a psychopath. Ramirez had a schizoid personality disorder. Psychiatrist Stone say that Ramirez escaped death many times at the age of 6 years old. As a result, later developed temporal lobe epilepsy, aggressiveness, and hypersexuality. At age 12, Ramirez was taken under the wing of his older cousin, Miguel, who later became a serial killer and a rapist during his service in the Vietnam War. Miguel often shared his war stories and women he raped during his time in Vietnam. He would also show Ramirez pictures of women he dismembered. Ramirez would later admitted of being fascinated by these pics instead of being repulsed by the photos. Miguel taught Ramirez military skills including stealth skills and kill tactics. Ramirez often found ways to escape his abusive alcoholic father by sleeping in cemeteries. His father once tied him in a crucifix in a cemetery overnight as a punishment. So this man never stood a chance of being a normal person. At age 14 in 1974, he began using LSD frequently. He and his cousin Mike bonded over drugs and alcohol. During this time, Ramirez began to cultivate an interest in the occult and Satanism. He began to have sexual fantasies with graphic violence, including forced bondage, murder, mutilation, and rape. Ramirez had a fascination with killing animals when he was a kid. He took a job at the Holiday Inn and would steal the keys of the sleeping customers. On occasion, Ramirez molested two children in an elevator at the hotel, but it was never reported or was he ever prosecuted. He was fired because he was caught raping a woman and the husband caught him. The husband beat him at the scene. The charges were dropped because the couple lived out of state and declined to return to Texas to testify against him. At the age of 15, Mike, Ramirez's cousin, shot his second wife fatally in the face. Instead of being traumatized, he was fascinated by the whole crime. Ramirez dropped out of school at freshman year. Former teachers and students reported Ramirez as a troublemaker and a victim of bullying. Ramirez's cousin Mike was in a mental hospital and was released in 1977. He took Ramirez in these voyeuristic walks, spying on women in the area. At age 22, Ramirez moved permanently to California. He started using cocaine, committing theft and burglaries to procure money for his addiction. On April 10, 1984, Ramirez murdered May Lung, a 9-year-old girl, in her apartment building. He beat and raped and strangled the little girl. It wasn't until 2009 when his DNA matched a sample at the crime scene. 2 months after that, he started a series of home invasions. On June 28, 1984, 79-year-old Jenny was murdered in her apartment. She had been stabbed repeatedly in the head, neck, and chest while asleep. 9 months later, on March 17, 1985, Ramirez attacked a 22-year-old Maria Hernandez, shooting her in the face with a handgun. She survived by playing dead until he left the garage. Unfortunately, Hernandez's roommate was fatally shot in the head by Ramirez. Within an hour later, Ramirez pulled a 30-year-old Sai Hun out of her car, shot her twice. She was pronounced dead at the scene. So these murders started an extensive coverage from the news media. 1 week later, he entered a home and killed 64-year-old Vincent Charles in his sleep with a gunshot to his head. His wife was awake. He beat her and bound her and shot her multiple times. On May 14, 1985, Ramirez entered the home of 66-year-old Bill Doy and his disabled wife, 56-year-old Lillian Doy. Ramirez shot him in the face. He bounded the wife and raped her. Bill died due to his injuries. 2 weeks later, he drove a stolen car, Monrovia, and stopped at the house of Mabel Ma Bell, who is 83-year-old, and 81-year-old Florence Nettie, who is 81 years old. He bludgeoned both with a hammer and used an electric cord to shock them. He raped them and drew pentagram symbols in their bedrooms. The next day, Ramirez drove the same car to Burbank and snuck into the home of 42-year-old Carol Cal at gunpoint. He bound Carol and her 11-year-old son. He raped Carol repeatedly and fled the scene. On July 21, 1985, he burglarized the house of 75-year-old Mary Louise Cannon, a widowed grandmother. While asleep, he bludgeoned her and stabbed her to death. 3 nights later, Ramirez broke into the home and bludgeoned 16-year-old Whitney Bennett. He beat her with a tire iron as she slept in the bedroom. She survived the attack but needed 478 stitches. On July 7, Ramirez burglarized the home of 60-year-old Joyce Lucille Nelson. While asleep, he beat her up to death by stomping on her face. Then, his next victim, a woman named Sophie Dickman. She is a 63-year-old woman. He assaulted her and handcuffed her at gunpoint. He attempted to rape her but left. 2 weeks later, on July 20, Ramirez purchased a machete and drove to Glendale and chose the home of a 66-year-old Layla Needing and her husband. And he hacked them with a machete, then killed them fatally with shots to the head. He shot the 32-year-old and bound the 8-year-old son. On August 6, 1985, Ramirez drove to Northridge and broke into the home of 30-year-old Chris Peterson and Virginia Peterson. He crept into the bedroom and shot Virginia in the face. The husband fought back and Ramirez fled the scene. The couple survived. 2 nights later, he drove the stolen car to Diamond Bar and chose the home of Sakina Aboat and her husband, Lias Aboat. He entered the house and crept into the master bedroom. He instantly killed Elias with a shot to the head. He handcuffed and beat Sakina and brutally raped her. The commotion woke up the couple's 3-year-old son. He tied up the child and continued to rape Sakina. The son untied himself and went to the neighbor for help. On August 18, he entered the home of 66-year-old Peter Pan and 62-year-old Barbara Pan. He shot Peter in the temple while sleeping, killing him instantly. He beat and sexually assaulted Barbara and shot her in the head and left her for dead. However, miraculously, she survived her injuries. On August 24, 1985, Ramirez traveled 76 miles to South LA in a stolen orange Toyota to Mission Viejo. That night, he arrived at the home of 45-year-old James Romero Jr., who had just returned from a trip from Mexico from a family vacation trip. Romero's son was awake, 13-year-old James Romero III. He heard rattling in the bushes and went to investigate and found nothing. James saw the car and license plate. He ran to wake up his parents and Ramirez fled the scene. Now, after that plan didn't work, Ramirez broke into the home of 30-year-old Bill Karn and his fiancée, 20-year-old Inez Erickson, through a back door. He entered the couple's bedroom. He shot Bill 3 times in the head before turning the gun on his wife. He then identified himself as the Night Stalker and forced her to swear on Satan as he beat her and punched her and then he bound her. So before leaving, he said, "Tell them the Night Stalker was here." She untied herself and went to a neighbor house for help, and miraculously, after surgeons removed 3 bullets from his head, the husband survived. Now, two detectives, Frank Salerno and Gail Garillo, contacted the manufacturer of the shoes